Welcome back, guys, to Content, a podcast for local creatives. Super excited for this episode today with Kaden Love. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
I feel like this has been a very long time coming for us too. Mm-hmm. You were actually one of the first people to fill out my survey on my Instagram when I posted that video months ago. Mm-hmm. And that was super exciting for me. I was like, this is awesome. People want to come and be on the podcast. And then you had stuff with your book being recently published and released. And I had some stuff over the past couple months. And I feel like it's just been a long time coming for today.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful that we finally made the time work today and excited for this conversation today.
Yeah.
And I do want to kind of give... just let you know beforehand, I know very little to nothing about kind of your area of expertise.
That's fine.
Being an author and stuff like that. And that's kind of one of the joys of the podcast, right? Mm-hmm. Is I've been able to meet so many different people from different disciplines and things that they are passionate about. And I'm able to just learn so much from individuals. Yeah. So for that reason, I think it's going to be a really fun conversation, especially for those that are kind of wanting to do something similar to what, you're doing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to just kind of start getting to know you a little bit and kind of your background in, writing specifically and being an author and stuff like that. Where would you say that love or fascination for writing began for you?
A lot of it was, of course, I think a lot of authors, when they were younger, they grew up reading a lot. And fantasy has always been kind of a part of my life, going in and out. And that's the genre that I write in. But it wasn't until my early college years that I actually started writing. Much of that came from my younger brother getting really into Dungeons and Dragons.
Really?
And he was making his own stories with that. I'm like, I want to try it. And so I started writing things down. And I don't know, I think that there's just a point in my life when I really started to write down my thoughts and try to put them in a good way so that when it's read, it sounds not to be prideful or anything, but profound to me.
No, yeah, 100%.
At least. And then that kind of translated into stories. And I never went into it with just a purpose to entertain, but to do something through story. And
yeah.
I think that's where the power of it comes from.
Yeah. And what is it about the medium of writing that you feel is so powerful to you personally, would you say?
I feel like I can just create a whole world of my own, whereas, there's so many ways to express yourself through art or film or so many things, but a lot of these things require a huge team of people. And with words, I can build a whole vision and put it into someone's mind, emotions and all of that. And to have someone kind of experience my thoughts thrown onto paper, just, I don't know, it feels really cool, and especially when people enjoy it.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's really cool kind of where you started, just kind of shorter stories related to more Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. At what point, because I'm imagining those are kind of shorter stories.
Yeah.
A book is a lot more to kind of, it's a whole different beast you have to attack. Mm-hmm. At what point was it okay, this is, a fun hobby that I enjoy, to no, I'm passionate about this. I want to kind of go all in and see how far I can take it.
Mm-hmm. So I started writing my book in nursing school, actually. Okay, so that's my day job. I'm a nurse. And I just started, I wanted to create a story, just kind of because I think that when someone has so much of a passion, they want to create something on their own. Mm-hmm. And that's, I read things, and when there's a story out there that you want, that you can't find, you just create it on your own. And I started drafting early ideas, and eventually, I got to the point where I had maybe 50 pages worth.
Wow.
And at that point, I'm very much of a committed person. If I set myself to it, it's going to happen.
That's awesome.
And so I started writing more and finished the first draft of my 400-ish page book.
Wow.
in about 9 months.
That's awesome.
And it took about 2 years total to publish. So I had very early thoughts out there, but it took a lot to really get it to what it is today.
Yeah, that's so cool. There's a couple points I want to touch on from what you just shared. First of all, how has that been balancing a day job and a creative passion in writing?
It's difficult, and especially now at this point where before it was more of a hobby, but now it is a full-time side job. I'm a self-published author, so essentially an entrepreneur. I do all of the work myself. My wife's an illustrator, so
cool.
she does all the fun-looking stuff with it and the cover. And it can be difficult and overwhelming sometimes, but I do work a schedule where I have Wednesdays and weekends off. And so those weekends, a lot of time are dedicated to family and other matters, but Wednesdays I try to make that writing day. And especially in the evenings or downtime, I try to maximize that. And so it really just puts into perspective how valuable time is.
Yeah.
And so I try to make the best of each moment. And it was a little easier with this book. I did that while I was in school. I had a pretty easy desk job where I had lots of downtime.
Yeah.
But now that I've started with the second book, it's been a little bit of a different beast.
Yeah. No, 100%. What have you done to try to reduce burnout? Because I feel like that's a huge thing for me. I have my kind of day job. I do this on the side. It's super fun. I have the hopes that it'll get big enough where it can be my main thing at some point. But there definitely are days where it's man, I have the time, but I do not have the bandwidth or the mental capacity to be dedicating to this stuff. Are there things that you have put into place that have been helpful to reduce burnout? What do you say?
I think there are 2 points. One being, so I'm also a runner. And I run every day except for Sunday. So a lot of people are like, how do you wake up and do that every morning before work? It's I just don't give myself a choice.
Yeah.
And so when I'm in a normal drafting phase, I try to hit at least 1,000 words a day, even when I work. So I just try to get that point where I don't give myself much of a choice, but I don't try to be on myself too heavy if I don't make it.
Yeah.
Other than that, I think that first draft is what I really love. And editing, especially working with an editor, can be difficult. And that's where I kind of feel that burnout. It's hard to keep your head up because literally you're just having your work criticized over and over again until it gets better. And so in that time, I try to work on, a side project, drafting something else, just so that I'm always focusing on the part that I love, even though I have to deal with the other stuff that's not as fun.
Yeah, 100%. I'd love to kind of dive into that a little bit. You mentioned that you kind of wrote your initial draft in about 9 months, and then it took 2 years to go through the process of getting that to a published book. Can you walk me through A to Z, that whole process?
Yeah. So the funny thing with it is that I tell people that the book they read today before was twice as long, and there's a thing in writing called purple prose. It's essentially when people make it sound as fancy as possible.
Gotcha.
And you probably couldn't even read that book because I tried to sound as medieval as I could. And it was terrible, but I learned so much. So I had some friends in one of my young men's leaders growing up is now a self-published author full-time.
Nice.
And I reached out to a guy online that is just a self-published author to kind of talk about that, or, going to an agent for traditional publishing. Because self-publishing used to be kind of what you did if you couldn't make it back then. But today it's, do you want to do all the work on your own, pay for your editor and illustrator, or do you want to try to shoot your shot? I wanted my book out there. I want self-published. And so a lot of people will tell you if you're writing a fantasy book and it's your first, you want to under 150,000 words.
Okay.
Which is about how much that is. It translates maybe to 400 to 500 pages.
Why is that?
It's difficult to have your first book be super big because you're trying to get people to invest in you, essentially. And so that one was about 225.
Okay.
So I cut it down a ton, and I sent it out to some friends that were willing to read it early on. And honestly, I think I had one make it all the way through.
Really?
And so it took a ton of work really sizing that down. And then, by the time I got to my editor, she was amazing, helped me learn so much so that, my future work doesn't need as much correction. But usually people go with their editor through it and finish it in a couple months. That part took me, like 8 months, maybe. Long time.
Wow.
So just a huge learning curve. And then with that, I went through Kickstarter to release it. And now it's just more so on Amazon and then working with bookstores.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, it reminds me of, I forget who said this quote, but it's like, I wanted to write you a short letter, but I didn't have enough time, so I just wrote you a long one, or something like that.
Yeah.
Like it's like an art to be able to concisely communicate a message without all the extra fluffy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's honestly like an art and a skill to be able to do that. I did want to ask, like, what do you feel like are the pros of both sides of publishing, of doing it by yourself or doing it through the traditional way?
Mm-hmm. So traditional is what usually when you tell people they publish a book, it's usually traditional.
Gotcha.
Essentially, it's owned by a company, and there are caveats to that. They make the big final decisions on things, and they get you the editor. They choose the cover art for you,
mm-hmm.
and they help with some of the marketing. And so, honestly, if you get picked up by them, it's free for you. They're buying the rights to your story and getting it out there. A lot of that's done through an agent. And the big hard part about getting that is getting an agent that likes your book and they'll pitch it to a company that'll buy it.
Gotcha.
So querying is what people call it. That's basically you send out an application for people to pick up your story. And, there are plenty of authors out there that do that for like a decade and don't get anything.
Yeah.
Free on your part, and it can be really lucrative. So if you are a big name and people really love your book, that's how you get, a New York Times bestselling list.
Gotcha.
But there are plenty of traditional authors out there that, their publishers just kind of get them out there and let them free. They don't really do much for them. So it's a lot of what is selling, because that is so much more of a business. So on the other side, self-publishing, you have to pay for your own editor, which can cost a couple $1,000.
Gotcha.
Illustrations, meaning cover art and stuff, can cost anywhere from a couple $100 to a couple $1,000. I was fortunate to have my wife do it, and she is a professional illustrator.
That's awesome.
But there are plenty of, that is the hard thing, is that that's essentially an advertisement, that cover.
Gotcha.
A lot of people will look at self-published books. You can tell it's self-published if it's not that good, or you can tell, you might not be able to tell, because a lot of people judge a book off of cover just by what it is.
Yeah.
And you've got to do that all on your own. You've got to manage. Amazon is a really big tool that most people use for selling their books. You manage the whole business side of it and marketing as well.
Gotcha.
So you have more freedom to do whatever you want, because you don't have any thing that you're trying to hit. It's just what you do.
Yeah. So you put together this Kickstarter, and I'm assuming most of the funds from that came or were used for the editor.
Mm-hmm.
What other expenses were there outside of the editor that you had in the whole process?
So for me, editing, and especially now, the excess is going to the second book for
Gotcha.
editing. And a lot of just the covering things in it, like getting proofs of books sent to make sure they're good before sending them out, and
Gotcha.
then shipping and all those costs. And now I've used some of my income from that to do an audiobook.
Oh, cool.
So that's another thing. I had to hire my own narrator rather than going through a company.
Yeah. And where do you go to print a book? Are there
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess that's a question.
Yeah. So it has been made so much easier for self-publishing today.
Okay.
Because there are two big major things: KDP, which is Kindle Direct Publishing. So Amazon, if your book is on Amazon, It'll be, people can order it and it'll print directly to them.
Like they won't have a huge stock of them. They'll just print it as they're getting orders. Okay, cool.
And I mean, if it's a big enough book, I think that I'm sure they have some stock somewhere.
Yeah.
Then there's another company called Ingram Spark that distributes to any like book retailer out there.
Okay.
So like I've done some signings at Barnes & Noble, and when Barnes & Noble wants to stock it, it's in their system already. Like my book isn't at Target right now or Walmart, but it's in their system. So if someone wanted to go order it from those websites, they could.
Cool. That's super cool.
Yeah.
And like, how did you go about like promoting your Kickstarter? Like obviously like you put it up, you filled out all the information and stuff like that, but how did you like get the word out there and like actually find support for people to like financially put money into you and believe in you?
A lot of that was from Twitter. Twitter is, I think, the best place for authors to interact with each other. And whenever people ask me about marketing advice early on, I just tell them to read other independent authors, read their books, talk about how much you love them, and you'll gain support. Just be a positive influence, and people will see who you are. And then you have things going up to that. You know, I did a cover reveal for my thing in June, and it came out in January. And so people knew that there was something coming. And now much of my promotion has since come from Instagram, because I've just started an account with Reels that's really kind of just blown up.
Yeah. That's super interesting that like you have that view of Twitter, because I feel like Twitter, at least in my eyes, is like a dying like social platform.
Yeah.
What do you think it is about like Twitter that is so beneficial for like your specific niche?
I just think it's because there are a lot of authors on there.
Okay.
People just kind of talk around on there, and there's been people trying to move to Blue Sky or Threads, other similar kind of copies, but it seems that people are just kind of sticking around there. And that's where I feel like I have the most interactions with authors themselves, whereas readers are more so on Instagram.
Yeah, 100%. I do want, like, I'm excited to talk about like the marketing side of like stuff like that. But I do want to kind of backtrack a little bit before we get to that point, and just kind of talk about like your processes going through writing the book itself. How do you go about like concepting? Do you feel like it's kind of based off your lived experiences, people you know? Is it kind of more based off like other books that you've read? Is it a mix of both? What would you say is kind of your concepting process for writing a book?
I think it's a big mix of both. So as far as my outlining, I tell people that I do like a skeleton. So I have bits that I need to hit, and then I fill it in with the meat as I write. I'm very open to like if an inspiration comes to change something while writing, but I have a general idea of where I'm going. And the direction I head a lot is where I want the characters to go. And like I said, I want my story to have a purpose. So what lesson is going to be taught there is obviously something that's very important to me.
Yeah.
And then that will just kind of go and be put into the story. But I'll give myself a lot of time just in the mornings to kind of think, write out ideas, and then as I write, they kind of fill in their spaces there.
Gotcha. Is there like a specific purpose that you would say with this series, or is it more like a purpose per book, or both, would you say?
I think both. This one is a lot about faith, which I feel like something that is kind of looked down on in a lot of modern fantasy. You know, I was kind of sick of seeing like any religious figures in fantasy looked down on as crazy people. So that's where the original idea for this comes from. You know, I have 6 kingdoms, you could say, that each focus on a different virtue, and they live that to the extreme. Some people being, you know, exact obedience, others being complete humility. And so that was the backbone of it. And then we introduced the dilemma, and many other things have come from that. And with fantasy books, war is often a big topic. And my wife's actually from Russia. Okay. So going through this, the whole conflict with Russia and Ukraine was very much on my mind.
Wow. Yeah.
So I wrote it a lot for her as like an anti-war book. Just there is war, but there's so many things pointed out how just stupid it is.
Yeah. No, 100%. And how have you like gone about, like you mentioned the skeleton and kind of how you approach kind of your processes and stuff like that, but like you have such a big story. Do you have like a specific timeline going, like when you start writing, like I want to get this done in X amount of months, or is it like I'm just going to put in X amount of words per day and just as long as it takes until it's done?
That's what I do with the outline. But now that I'm now on the second draft of my second book, and because I don't really put a timeline until I know how long it's going to be, which I don't really know until it's close to being done.
Yeah.
So now that I have the first draft finished, I know, it'll take me a couple more weeks to go through this. Then I'm giving my first initial readers that are giving me feedback like a month and a half to go through it.
Yeah.
2 to 3 months with my editor, and then I add just some extra space to give me time. And so I finished this draft around a month ago, and am just right now kind of sitting on January for it being published. So that'll be a year since the first. And honestly, it's just as fast as I can get it out, but making it the most quality.
Yeah. Do you feel like because now that you've published your first book, you're starting to get more of a following on social and like people are getting to know you and stuff like that, that there's more of a pressure on timelines?
I think a little, and I think it's just always a little more on my own too. Books are something really interesting because, a lot of times mine was 2 years. You have some people put in a decade and want the next one right away.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I've had it that much yet because I'm still a very new author. I have people who have enjoyed the book and are excited for the second, but I haven't had anyone like going like, where's the next book?
Yeah.
I feel like a year in between is a very reasonable gap. And so getting it out by then, I think most people will be happy.
Yeah, 100%. I now do want to dive a little bit into the marketing side of stuff. Because that's like one of the things I've really noticed as I've gone through the podcast is like I interact with a lot of really cool people doing really cool things. And like, for example, I just had, a guy, he does music, he performs. And one of the insights from him was like, there's so many people performing live music, stuff like that in the area in Utah. And they're like really spectacular artists. And like, but when you go to like their Spotify, they have like 5 followers or like their Instagram has like 50. And it's like, marketing is so essential in my mind. And like, I hope that like this podcast can help, people like you, people that come on the podcast, like get more of a following and just be discovered. I guess let's just start, like, what role has marketing played in your journey as an author?
A lot. So I think my eyes were opened a lot once I got the book out there that it's so much of an entrepreneurship. A lot of my time each day is like, as much as some people want to, be like, oh, I need a break from social media. I can't.
Yeah.
Like I have to really have a strict schedule on things, constantly reaching out to people, and just really continually posting content. And I mean, there's so many ways to do it, but just social media, I think my eyes have been really opened to how much that does. And of course, word of mouth is something that's really great. And I really do hope that eventually my book will hit that point where so many people are reading it just because they recommend it to each other.
Yeah.
But a lot of it now is just, I need people to just see it online. Yeah,
100%. So like, what techniques have you employed through social media that you've found like have been working for you?
So Instagram Reels is definitely my top thing. I have an author friend that he has made, like, now it's his full-time job. And he got all of his success from TikTok. And all on his TikTok shop. So I worked with him to like work on some strategies, and TikTok's kind of slowed down for me. But I have gone up, I'm right now on my publishing Instagram at 12,000 followers.
Awesome.
And it's been going up. Like I get a couple hundred a week just because I post 3 reels a day.
Wow.
So it initially started out with just book content, but now that my book's out, I've started maybe like once a day. One of them will be related to my book.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of that is making myself known just as a presence, talking about books, doing kind of that generic book content, but trying to offer something unique, making it funny, enjoyable. And so as that goes, my reels, I don't know if I'd say they're really that great.
Yeah.
But I have just been following that algorithm. So I post 3 times a day in between certain points, and it just works. Like, it just continues to grow. It's like one of those things where I say I don't give myself choice if I do it or not.
Yeah.
Day off, I just spend, like half hour recording a bunch of quick videos.
Really?
Give it a little bit of thought, and then I just post them throughout the day.
That's honestly an incredible feat.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like a lot of people that aren't in the social media space don't understand how much effort goes into the reels that are being posted. Because like, I feel like the hardest part is concepting ideas, like thinking, what am I even going to talk about, or like put together for the video. What do you feel like resonates most? Like, what type of content or reels gets like the most engagement or does the best? What do you say?
A lot of people like, I feel like the most generic, easy one, a lot of people like book recommendations.
Okay.
And certain niches. So certain videos that have kind of exploded for me were ones that it's like, okay, book recommendations based off of your favorite video games. People see that there and it goes. The one that really set my Instagram off was, it was just a video of me typing, and it said, some days I want to take a break from writing, but then I remember him, and it shows a picture of Brandon Sanderson, who is the biggest name probably right now in fantasy.
Yeah.
And that one did so well, I think, because so many people are big fans of his, and they think it's funny enough that they'll send it to a friend.
Yeah.
So getting interaction, so just relatable things and interaction has really done big. Another recent reel that has just been doing a ton for me is I'll say like, okay, let's give book recommendations based on people's favorite video games, like I talked before. But this thing I said, okay, comment your favorite video game. Someone will comment a book recommendation. I don't do anything, and people are having their own conversation in the comments.
Yeah. That's awesome. No, it's interesting because just recently there was a podcast with the head of Instagram. I don't know if you've seen this, but they asked him like, what is the biggest indicator of like a reel going viral? And he's like, honestly, the one thing you need to be looking at more than anything is shares per reach. So like, if people are taking it and sending it to other people, that's what's going to push it out to, more people. Because basically like how I've had the algorithm, at least through Instagram, explained to me is like, you have a video and Instagram will push it out to maybe 100 people and they'll kind of see how it does. Like if it gets likes, comments, sends, based on how it does, it'll push it out to 500, 1,000, 10,000. That's how things go viral, is like at each stage they're doing well and then it's being pushed out. So I think like that's super cool that you found that success already and like found the stuff that works and it's kind of in line with, what the head of Instagram is talking about and stuff like that. Outside of social media, what would you say have been, because there's like, obviously I don't know a bunch about, your world, but like there are like book signings and book showings, what opportunities have been presented to you outside of social media that have helped you get your name out there?
A lot of those have been reaching out to people, going to local Barnes & Noble, and they're almost always open to do a book signing. And I live in Sandy, and that one just recently reopened. And so I was there a couple days after opening, and it just went really well. And I still haven't seen any convention experience, but I'll be at Brandon Sanderson's Dragonsteel convention in December, and I'm hoping that does really well. And I think it's a lot of just kind of making yourself known.
Yeah.
It is hard outside of social media, but all of my books in the back will say like, if you enjoyed this, leave a review and share it with a friend.
Yeah. What are these conventions? Like, what is a convention?
Yeah, it's just like, it's kind of like a Comic-Con.
Okay.
But this one is just solely based on like Brandon Sanderson's work.
Gotcha.
And so many other things are there, but because he's kind of blown up, people come for him and things related to him. And there's going to be other authors there, but I was lucky enough to like get a position
Gotcha.
there. And so I'm just kind of hoping, I don't really know what to expect too much, but I'm just going to go there, have a bunch of books to sell, and hope that it does well.
There you go. How do you work your way into that position there?
There's an application for it.
Okay.
So I just had to leave all my social information, like social media information, book information, and I guess that they just thought it was good enough. So a lot of things are just like, applications, and you're not going to get accepted to everything out there, but just shooting your shot to see what you can get.
Yeah, 100%. Throughout your journey of just your writing this book, working on writing, this entire journey, what have been kind of some like pivotal moments or miracles that you feel like really stand out thus far?
I think a lot of that is just having interactions with people that really enjoy my work, seeing that it's kind of done well, like that it actually means something to them.
Mm-hmm.
And there have just been so many random little things that have worked out. Mentioned Brandon Sanderson plenty of times, but we have some friends that are in his lecture series at BYU.
Oh, cool.
They invited us to come, and I gave them a copy of my book. I don't know if anything will come from it, but it was a really cool experience because I think that he's definitely the biggest inspiration for me there. And Utah's just a wonderful place, especially for authors.
Really?
Like the author of The Maze Runner lives up the street from me.
Cool.
There's a place in Provo called Moon's Rare Books, and I did a giveaway of my book with him, and he has almost 1 million followers on.
Yeah, I think he's at 1 million now. I saw the reel. It's awesome.
Yeah, so it was just a really cool. Just having a bunch of connections that just randomly work out, because I feel like I'm still just some kid trying to get his work out there, and somehow it works.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about like the kind of indie author community. Like, how big is it? What kind of support have you gotten from it? How has that been interacting with those within the community?
It's been awesome. And I think especially because a lot of us are just all trying to do our best, trying to work our hardest. And I've been working with like a smaller group of authors, just like, some are in Canada, some in Australia, and a couple in the States. There's about 16 of us, and we just have a Discord, and we're always promoting each other's work.
Cool.
So if any of us has questions, because there's so many random things that come up, like book formatting, you're having like an error, or if someone is figuring out how to run Facebook ads well, we'll just help each other out because, we're all trying to do the same thing. We've all been through the ups and downs together. And then, interacting with some of the people that are having so much success that this is their full-time career is just a really great and humbling opportunity.
That's super cool. Would you say like there's been a specific person or like mentor that has been the most impactful or influential on your personal journey?
There have been a bunch of really great authors out there. There's one in Seattle. His name's Zach Argyle, and he and his wife, she's a book YouTuber as well. He's just a really awesome guy that I was able to connect with when he came to the last Salt Lake Comic-Con. And he and his wife know, him being an indie author, how difficult it can be sometimes to raise a lot of funds. So they actually do a thing every year called the Indie Fantasy Fund. Okay. Where it's basically like a scholarship. You submit a chapter and they help give money to do certain things. This year, they did it for audiobooks. Last year, they did a bunch of cash prizes and and a couple service grants is what they call them. And probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, indie editor out there right now. She offered free editing service for someone that got picked. Well, I
Wow.
got picked. And so I'm definitely sticking with her, and I'll pay for my next book, but I got her whole editing thing for free.
That's awesome.
And she has such a huge reputation that, you know, it automatically put me on the map there. And so just having them help me make that connection, and then Zach's always there when I have questions about things, and all these other authors, has just been an awesome blessing.
That's huge. That's awesome. What would be like your biggest recommendation for us on the other side of things? Like, we're looking for new things to read. We want to support maybe these smaller indie artists. Like, how do we go about finding you guys?
I think a lot of it is, I feel like I first found a lot of indie authors through book YouTube accounts.
Okay.
Daniel Green is probably the biggest one, and he's also stepped into becoming like an independent author. And I mean, he has as much of a following as any traditional author now, because everyone knows him in that sphere. But just looking out for books, and because it can be a little more difficult, just, you know, because when people want books, they usually just look at top charts or things like that.
Yeah.
But when you find an independent author, and if you read their book, just leaving reviews is such a big thing. And even if it's, you know, you didn't enjoy it too much, or if you just give it a couple stars, just that statistic helps a lot. And Kickstarter, I think, is actually one of the biggest things, especially for me as a consumer enjoying it.
Yeah.
With Brandon Sanderson doing his secret projects, what he did essentially is he wrote 4 books during the pandemic and released them all last year.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a big Kickstarter campaign that he did those, and they came with goodies and stuff. Well, that was all technically self-published content.
Really?
And so there's a big thing now where I think people are trying to follow him, and they'll release really cool leather-bound editions of their books. And these are independent authors that have a bit more of a big following.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just go to Kickstarter, look at the publishing and fiction, just checking out the books there. If there's one that looks appealing, and, you know, it does mean a big difference rather than just going to the bookstore and buying a random book. Yeah,
100%. I also did want to ask, so are you 25?
Mm-hmm.
Generally, I'd imagine you're younger than most authors out there trying to make it happen.
Yeah.
What has that experience been like? How have people treated you? You feel like there's been a difference? Mm-hmm. How has it all been, kind of being younger in that space?
I think it's been a little fun. It's been weird because, like, even though I'm 25, I get told every day, especially work with like a teenager. And so my book isn't written with any explicit content, but it's directed at an adult audience just because I try to make the concepts a little more complex.
Mm-hmm.
And so to have that there, you know, I've had so many people be like, oh, you like a young adult author, like writing something like Harry Potter, stuff like that. Where I'm trying to, you know, hit that older fantasy community. And like I've had at signings, people are like, oh, are you the author's son? Like, nope, that's me.
Like, it's me.
And I don't know, I think it's inspiring for a lot of people. A lot of people are like, wow, look at you being this young doing that. You know, when I was 25, I was just partying all day doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
But there also is, I think, some difficulty for people trying to completely trust what I'm making.
Mm-hmm.
Just noting that I'm young, they might think, oh, he doesn't have a lot of experience, so his content might not be that good.
Right.
And that is one of the things with social media, is if they find my book through social media, most likely attached to my face.
Yeah.
So there's ups and downs. But what for me, I think is really inspiring is just that knowing that I'm younger, I don't have to get on myself for not having as much success as I might like at this age.
Yeah.
That, you know, I look at people that are publishing their first book at 35, whereas, you know, I hope to hit 35 and have, you know, like 10 books out or something like that.
Yeah, 100%. With like all that you've learned throughout this kind of personal journey of writing, what would you say, like, if someone were to come to you, like, what would be your biggest piece of advice for someone that's just getting started?
Write a lot and read a lot. So I think that you can't really do much until you have that first draft finished. So if your intent is to write a book, do it, go through with it. And it doesn't have to be perfect by any means, because mine was so far from perfect. And, once you get to that point, there's so many steps along the way, and just never hesitate to reach out to people. Yeah. Independent authors are really easy to get a hold of, because I feel like they're on social media so much, but that didn't stop me, from reaching out to some of my favorite traditionally published authors, really big ones, just straight up asking for advice. There's no harm done in sending just a DM on social media. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you'll get an answer, sometimes you won't. And I think that big turning point for my journey was when I asked just one author that I thought his cover and his book sounded really interesting. And so I just asked him for advice, and he sat down, had a Zoom call with me for a couple hours. Wow. And just explained whole indie publishing process. And so I think just asking questions and putting the work in is the best thing you can do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you're doing all the right things. I feel like I've talked about this on previous episodes. It takes a lot of effort and time for me to put together an entire podcast episode, going from, either the person reaching out to me, me reaching out to them, setting up a time, coming, setting everything up. And then there's also like hours of preparation before, questions, research. And then we got all the editing, making reels. Like there's a ton of effort that goes into it. And it has to be people that I like genuinely believe in and like think they're doing really cool things. And it's cool for me to see that I feel like you're really just everything you can be controlling is really going in the right way. And I find that very, admirable, the effort that you're putting into this. And I hope that, this podcast can, even if it's just a little bit, help out with you in your journey. Believe it or not, we're kind of nearing the end of the podcast. The time always flies. Mm-hmm. But what I like to do at the end is give the person being interviewed the freedom to kind of choose what note we end the podcast on. So that can be something that you came today wanting to say and haven't shared, or you wanted to share earlier and didn't have the opportunity to, or just anything at all that comes to mind. I'm kind of just going to give you the freedom to end on whatever note you want to end on.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that is we've been talking so much about publishing, but to transcend that, anything creative is just making friends out there, I think is so important. My wife and I have some really good couple friends that, the girl is a musician, and she and I are both in that point where we're trying to really produce our content. Mm-hmm. Our medium is pretty different, but the things we're doing is very similar. Yeah. And it just really helps to have someone there that understands what you're going through. And no matter how you do it, is just to be positive, be a good friend. And one of the things that comes with things creative, you'll have critics, and especially those people that for some reason are so rage-filled that they just are having a bad day, and they will really put you down. And I think everyone will have moments like that with what they're creating. And to validate someone on what they're doing and to give your time to enjoy their writing, their music, or to just appraise what they're doing means a lot. And I think that just take time out of your day to appreciate the work that others do, because if you want people to appreciate yours, you've got to respect their time.
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kaden, for your time today, all your thoughts. I had a really fun time with this conversation. And wish you the best of luck, and hope you know that I'm, wanting to help if there's anything I can ever do for you.
Thanks. So appreciate it.
We'll end there.